Let's I'm going to start this off with talking about a couple of different terms here and what I mean. So as an archive, in our community of linguists, my background, I have a master's in linguistics, and I decided to step out of linguistics and go into archival science to bring something back to the linguistic community. In our community of linguists, we go through the literature, and archive, the term gets thrown around, it means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. It can mean a corpus or special collections unit within a memory institution, or as we saw for the California archive, within a linguistics department. It could be a building to some people, or it could be an organization. It could be an infrastructure marked by stewardship of a static resource, or it could be an infrastructure for dynamic resources, right? So what we mean by archives a little bit different from person to person, scholar to scholar. In a mixed archive, we're at the University of North Texas, all three authors here. And so we're marked by broadly scoped accessions. So we have accessions in language materials, and we have accessions in newspapers, and accessions in other things, and other things, and other things, right? So we have this big, broad archive. We have a single administrative structure, and we have the language archive exists as a special collection within the memory institution. Okay, so the institution is the University of North Texas, and the library, digital library, has over 3 million objects, but not all of those are within this collection, right? Because we got lots of digitizations from deeds and patents and all sorts of things that are relevant to Texas history. So the implications are, though, that across this large archive of the digital libraries, that there's a single metadata schema, and that it's somewhat rigid and inflexible and minimalistic in design, so that the use case for adding to that schema has to be thoroughly vetted and properly supported, that you just don't add to the metadata ridiculously in new ways that you can't support in other going on sustainability reasons. So the need of one client is pitted against another. So the different departments or different collections are the clients to this larger monolith, if you will. So I said already, our use case is digital collections at the University of North Texas. Coruscant is a special collection with the broader digital library infrastructure. And UNTL is the name of the metadata schema that we use at the University of North Texas Digital Libraries. So Hannah Tarver is the supervisor of digital projects, and she's the UNTL steward. So issues with the metadata schema go through her. Mark Phillips is the UNT Associate Dean for Digital Libraries. He's over everything digital libraries, digital projects. He's a great guy to work with, and I am the meager analyst here. If you want to know more about the language archive role in Coruscant, these two publications talk about what's been done already. Okay, so I'm looking here today at contributor roles in this particular context. Now, contributor roles describe how people have impacted a resource. So the who, the role of what they did, and then the resource, right? So we could talk about this as agent, relationship, and item, if we want to talk about it in terms of a graph. But these roles can be very descriptive, and they actually infer a frame of reference for the activity of impact. So let's see if I put that. Yes, I did. So one of the ones I like to use is judge versus interviewee. So if we have a agent that has the role of judge, you might be looking at a legal resource, right, or a legal product. Maybe he had a opinion that he wrote. If you have an interviewee, it could be anything, but it sat down, somebody had a conversation. And so it works in conjunction with other parts of the record, such as provenance and genre and form. So as archivists, we want to be faithful stewards of resources, and we want to understand how we got these resources and give those that information on to the people that would use those resources so they can be contextually used appropriately. So that's why provenance is so important. Genre and form help us understand the type, how it came to be, the type of thing it is, right? And so if we think about agent paradigms, like that reference point, here's a couple of examples. Legal and intellectual property, there's a couple of roles there. You can have first party, second party, licensee, licensor, patent, applicant, patent holder, copyright claimant, copyright holder. These are different roles that if you're going through a process that you'll get these different, you'll fill these kind of roles. In case law, you have a defendant, a plaintiff, a judge, a court recorder. These are all different roles that exist to help build resources in the legal domain. In the archiving domain, we think about things in terms of process. Let's see if I got that. Yeah, here we go. So we assume that there were creators, initial creators, and I think this applies to linguists as well. I mean, I've worked on 2 language documentation projects, so when I say I think, there's a little experience there. We have refiners. We go back and we edit some stuff. And then collection registrar. So when we bring it to the archive and we hand it over, there's some indexing that's done. Whether that's mediated or not mediated, there's all sorts of ways that happens. And then curators at the archive, they have a responsibility to do something with those materials. They do some actions to it, right? So they have a role. And then we have, when it gets reused, more action happens to those items, right? So we have some crucial management questions. So what roles exist in which schemes, and are they compatible? So UNTL has some roles. MARC, which is what 95% of the world's libraries use, has roles. OLAC has roles, right? So are these compatible? Is the semantics of the words that are used in those terms, are they compatible? Are they referencing the same kind of ideas? Which roles exist in which reference frames, not just the term, but the whole like idea that it invokes behind it, the grounding for it? And are we missing critical reference frames in our ability to describe resources and complete a complete record, or to give a fullness to the record, right? Do we need more or new roles, and what's the cost to do that? Okay, so since UNT roles are largely based on a subset of MARC roles, are there enough roles in UNTL to support Coruscant and Coruscant's desired implementation of OLAC to give it? And what are the overlaps and roles across the different schemas, and are there inaccessible frames of reference needed for the description of language resources, right? So this is basically a gap analysis. And so UNTL has 74 roles, MARC has 299, and OLAC has 24, right? So where do we fit then? So the comparison is UNTL and OLAC share only 14 roles, which are also common to MARC. OLAC has 5 roles which are not found in MARC, and they're custom. OLAC and MARC share 5 roles with a common name, but different semantic meanings. So a way forward here would be to take some of these and submit it to the MARC committee and say, hey, we should add these to the MARC set of roles. And there is a formal process for doing that. And I'm willing to lead on that, but I need some people to go with me. OLAC has some 5 roles which are, let's see, one second here. So the semantics, OLAC has some 5 semantic roles that don't match. So we need to find a way, if we're going to have libraries that, and Donna talked about larger libraries using these roles, if we're going to have them using those roles, what do we mean when we combine these data? Then we have to have a common understanding of what those terms mean, right? So there has to be some discussion to either deprecate those roles or to continue on. So here's the compatible roles, right? The 14 in the center. And since all of you are already OLAC experts, I'll just skip this and let you, since you know what all those are, right? But they cross a couple of different media types. Remember, I was talking about genre and form. So there's a couple there that can cross media types, and here are the 5 that OLAC has that are, exclusive, right? Data inputter, interpreter, participant, research participant, and developer. So here's, let's see here. So here's kind of the differential analysis. So when we look at the ones that are not compatible from what we have, the consultant in MARC terminology would probably be better as consultant to a project, and recorder would probably be better as a recordist. And so it's not in UNTL, but then there's this MARC consultant, which is also, so there is a role for consultant in MARC, and then there's also an additional role consultant to a project. But I think what we mean in OLAC is consultant to a project, not what MARC means by consultant. All right, I hope everyone's with me. So the compiler and semantics is different between the two. And the positor in the OLAC sense is just somebody that hands it over, but in the MARC sense, it's somebody who retains ownership and still hands it over for stewardship to the institution, and that's not exactly what we mean in the OLAC world. So there's a difference there, and understanding who gave something to a stewardship organization or a memory institution is very important. So I'm suggesting we kind of take a look at this as a community. Responder, not just the UNTL community as we struggle to make our data provided to OLAC, but as a broader community here. So in the responder, there's other roles here, right? And then some of them just don't exist because they're not in the purview. So what we did is we took this out and we said, okay, what are the basic paradigms? What are some paradigms that we can derive from the roles? And we have a sign language paradigm, an archiving paradigm, a lab paradigm, technology operator paradigm, and a publishing, performing arts paradigm, software paradigm, language project paradigm, an interview paradigm, and audio and text paradigm, right? So these are kind of like some of the who did what and what was the inferred action that they were doing, right? And so thinking about this then, you know, we have some that are really heavy in roles and some that are not. Maybe the OLAC community needs to think more about what happens. Are there, like, there's a couple ways forward here, right? OLAC community can get rid of roles and say we just go with MARC roles. But then what does MARC need that was really special to the OLAC community? That's one way forward. Another way forward is to say, oh, we'll pull those in. But if we pull them in, then we don't have the common semantics. That's a problem. So, so what are the overlaps and roles across the different schemes? And are there inaccessible frames of reference needed in the description of language resources? The answer is yes, that there are inaccessible frames of reference needed. So one of the issues would be sign language materials. And if we only did archiving paradigms, then the positor would be an issue. And the software paradigm, we think of it as developer, but actually developer in OLAC terminology has two meanings. It can also mean the person who develops a methodology. And so the confluence of that in MARC terminology is split out, okay? And so given the red and black highlights in the roles, not only are they a significant number of OLAC roles inaccessible via the UNTL schema, but the schema doesn't allow for description in key areas such as software development, sign language resources, and archival activities. So UNTL is managed in the libraries, and UNT is a school that trains archivists. You can get a degree in archives, you can get a degree in library science, master's, and you can get a PhD in information science that covers either of those, right? So it's really important that our university library also match theory, right? And so we have a lot of good input from people who have gone through the library science program in the library at UNTL. So it's not just a library, it's also like a lab library for the development of good things. So I'll leave it there and I'll take questions right now.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for perfect timing. And now the floor is open for questions. We have one first question. Yes.
I have a very short question. What's the difference between performer and singer?
You know, it could be your scope. Not all singers, well, not all singers are performers if you only sing to yourself, but not all performers are singers, right? I don't follow.
singers, but what is the difference between a singer and performer? Is a singer not also a performer?
They could be, but if you have a more specified morpheme, then you would use the more specific case, is generally the way this is thought of and understood. So performer is a broad category, lots of people, lots of types of active. Could go that way.
I don't like the term. Is it now on? Oh, you can understand me? Yes. I don't like the term consultant. We had informant before, yeah, but consultant is that you give some advice or suggestion, etc. And the consultant is not the owner of a documentation, yeah, or of a project. I think it's the other way around, that as I am as a linguist, yeah, I'm a consultant for the community to document their language. You understand? So you have a more very provocative, you have a colonialistic attitude that you say that these indigenous people, they are your consultants for your project, yeah? You are the manager, and they give you some, yeah, information. So they are the indigenous informants. So you just achieve...
Dr. Mosel,
yeah.
I've got mine on. If I have you've worked in Africa, you've worked in the Ivory Coast, I believe, right? So if I have a culture question, if I'm a linguist and I'm doing a language documentation project and I have a question about a certain anthropological function that I am observing but I don't really understand it, and I call you up and I say, this is what's happening, what should I do about it? What role does that put you in?
Consultant.
That means you have to define for each project roles. Yeah. And it's very dangerous to have just, we have to define the roles for each project because the perspectives can be different. And if you have just one term like consultant for very different roles, then that can provoke misunderstandings.
Indeed, and there is a definition for each of these. Mandana is behind you.
Thank you for this. I think that's a very important discussion, but we also need to think in terms, so from an archival point of view, with findability, accessibility, discoverability, and the idea that we need to mainstream, right? One of the question is, what would be the process? Because it's really important that if I say, I love the thing with the signer. Mm-hmm. A signer for me is someone who uses sign language and right. Not someone who paints signs. So beautiful. That's a fantastic example for a major problem, which shows the specialization where Mark comes from and where ELAR comes from, which does a fine-grained thing, which is an important distinction, which we need not to give up. So the question that I have is, what is the process that we basically make sure that Mark has signer or these things that they need to have so that we can adapt the system? Because of course, Mark and Dublin Core and so on, they come from written resources, right? And so we have adapted it to the others. So the process is, if you lead, how can we support you? Yeah, talk to me in email. And so the connection, like a personal connection, because I will draft essentially it's an argument as a paper that gets submitted to the committee that meets once a year. And then you lay out the use cases and you lay out the organizations that are using this term and where it is and such like this, because I know that like Aslan Sign Language Corpus is here at ELAR. So I know that these things exist in our community, and it needs to be brought up to the attention of, because Mark treats sign language as a handicap accessible issue. You're right, exactly. It's not appropriate, but not from a linguistic point of view. And so it's thinking about this then and helping, and I think there's an openness in the library, the broader library community of Mark, to think about things in terms of diversity. So pushing in on that way gives us a way to do that. But having institutions sign on saying, we're using this, this needs to change, blah, 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 is going to give heft to that appeal. So it's a Delamon issue. It could be. It is a Delaman issue that we need to push in that direction from different institutions. And I think it relates to what Bernard asked. And it's like, so here's a role where we can push towards accepting the specialties that language knowledge and linguistic knowledge and language archive knowledge can bring to the table for the big institutions where there's no language codes, where sign language is not in a role of being a full-fledged language next to all the spoken languages or the tactile languages. Yeah, thank you.